It's August 1945. The air across Japan is, well, it's thick with dust, with smoke, and with this just unbearable silence.
Yeah, an awful waiting silence.
The surrender's been announced, the fighting stopped, but for the millions of people who are just living in the wake of this total war, peace is.
Mm,
There's nowhere in sight. Defeat hasn't brought relief. It's brought absolute terror.
exactly. The bombs have stopped falling, which is a relief, I guess. But the psychological pressure is just immense because, years of this relentless, all-encompassing propaganda have drilled one simple, absolute idea into everybody.
That the Americans,
The
the
Gasian.
demons, that they're merciless. They're coming only for torture, for rape, for mass slaughter. There is absolutely no concept in their minds of a humane occupation. It doesn't exist.
And the response, which is so tragic but, predictable when you understand the culture of honor and sacrifice, it's to prepare for the only honorable alternative.
Mass suicide.
Yeah. They're literally waiting for the monster to arrive, believing that death before dishonor is their only path forward. But the material that our listener sent in, it focuses on one small farming community just outside Yokohama, and specifically on one 12-year-old girl named Ko. She's standing on this dusty road, watching the inevitable arrival, and then everything she was ever taught, everything her entire nation stood for, it just shatters in a single quiet moment of human decency.
Because that monster, that American soldier, does the unthinkable. Ko watches him kneel down, lift her exhausted 70-year-old grandmother Hana onto his back, and just start carrying her up this suffocating dusty hill.
And in her shock, Ko's words just burst out. She says it in Japanese, of course. "Why are you carrying my mother?"
Her whole world just stops right there on that slope.
That moment, that one question, is so much more than a simple anecdote from the occupation. It's really, you could argue it's the true ideological beginning of post-war Japan. This story is this powerful, agonizing microhistory of a national reckoning.
Welcome to Hidden Front History, the deep dive that takes your sources and finds the surprising stories that truly matter. Today, we're not just reading a historical account. We are tracing the emotional and the ideological journey of an entire village. A village that was forced to confront this impossible chasm between years of absolute hate propaganda and the stark, undeniable reality of kindness from their supposed enemy.
Right, and we're going to distill how and why kindness, not cruelty, became the most potent psychological force in that occupation, how it set the stage for this dramatic collapse of an entire national ideology, one that was completely rooted in this concept of death before dishonor. We're looking at the step-by-step process of how these deeply held state-sponsored beliefs are just dismantled.
By small, consistent acts of human dignity.
Exactly, and often against a backdrop of just unimaginable terror.
Okay, let's unpack that opening scene a little more, because you really need to understand the cultural and political weight of the defeat before you can appreciate the shock of the kindness that comes later.
Oh, absolutely. The source material puts us right there, in that emotional vacuum of August 15th, 1945.
That date is just seismic.
It is. You have Ko, she's 12, standing outside with her neighbors. They're all gathered around this tiny, crackling radio speaker. And from that speaker comes the emperor's voice.
A voice they've almost certainly never heard before.
Almost never. For the common person, this was the voice of a living deity. Not a politician, not a king, a god.
And that's the critical context you have to grasp, right? The emperor was the head of the Shinto faith, the symbol of the kokutai, the national essence. The belief wasn't just patriotism, it was a religious certainty. Japan was a divine nation, destined to win.
And suddenly, this divine, high-pitched, almost archaic-sounding voice is announcing the unthinkable. Japan had accepted defeat. The war was, and this is quote, simply over.
Not a glorious victory, not even a noble end. Just finished.
It wasn't just a military loss. It was a cosmic, divine betrayal. This is why the psychological collapse was so absolute.
And the immediate reaction that the source describes, it captures that perfectly. Ko watches the adults around her, and some of them just drop instantly to their knees, weeping openly. It's grief, but it's also this profound shame.
While others are just frozen, their faces are blank with shock, completely unable to process the dissonance between that divine promise and this humiliating new reality.
I mean, think about the emotional whiplash. For years, they've been prepared for Ketsugo, the final glorious stand.
Right, the decisive battle. Be ready to sacrifice every last man, woman, and child with bamboo spears if you have to. And in one broadcast, that sacred duty is just nullified. It's gone.
And for Ko's family, the weight of that sacrifice was already immense. Her father's missing in the Pacific. They haven't heard from him in 8 months. Her older brother was killed in the Philippines 2 years before.
So for her, the national sacrifice has been absolute, personal, devastating. And now, suddenly, that sacrifice seems utterly hollow, maybe even based on a lie.
Which leads directly to the core problem, right? This new fear. You go from the fear of being bombed to the terror of being conquered.
Yes. And the source makes it so clear that the propaganda wasn't just, rah-rah encouragement. It was a totalizing narrative designed to prevent surrender at all costs.
Because the Americans were inhuman. They were demons.
Literally, they were told the Americans would commit acts of unimaginable cruelty. So death was the only honorable alternative to being captured, and certainly preferable to allowing your daughters and your wives to fall into enemy hands.
And that narrative wasn't abstract. It immediately led to these tangible life or death discussions right there in this small community.
Talk spread really fast.
Yeah.
Villagers preparing for vast suicide, maybe a communal, honorable exit before these demons arrived. They even talked about fleeing deep into the mountains, which, for malnourished civilians, that's just a death sentence of a different kind.
But grandmother Hannah, who becomes this central figure of quiet, defiant resolve, she anchors the family. She's 70 years old, she's weathered, but she is so stoic.
The source really emphasizes her deep, practical commitment to one thing: survival.
When everyone else is talking about this desperate flight or this ultimate self-sacrifice, Hannah just says, "We stay. We have nowhere else to go."
And her decision is crucial.
Yeah.
It completely transforms the narrative. It goes from one of an immediate self-inflicted end to one of reluctant, agonizing, but necessary survival. She embodies this resilience that chooses existence over ideological purity.
And that survival hinges on getting through these next few weeks of what the source calls hollow silence between the surrender and the actual arrival of the occupation forces.
Because the war is officially over, but the essential infrastructure of life has just completely collapsed.
Gone.
The ration system, which was already meager, it just dissolves overnight. The local government officials who used to hand out the tiny portions of rice vanished. They're either scared of retribution or just trying to save themselves, and it leaves this desperate vacuum.
And you, the listener, you have to get this. They weren't just hungry. They were scraping the literal bottom of the barrel just to stay alive.
The source details the terrifying reality of that. Ko's family was surviving on thin rice gruel. That's it. Twice a day.
And Hannah's knowledge of the old ways, that becomes their lifeline.
A very precarious lifeline. She's the one who knows which wild plants are edible, which weeds you can boil for some nutrition. The source even mentions them stripping and chewing tree bark for any tiny bit of sustenance.
They are on the absolute final edge of survival. And compounding this physical misery is the constant psychological torture every night. Ko would lie on her thin mat and just listen to the adults whispering.
These endless cyclical questions, all fueled by the propaganda.
And the questions, they reveal the nature of their terror. Would the Americans line us up and shoot us? Will they separate families? Will they take the young girls?
That fear was a tangible, exhausting presence. It made sleep almost impossible. They were waiting not for peace, but for the promised hellish judgment that they had been conditioned to believe they deserved for losing.
And then, in early September, that silence finally breaks.
And the whole narrative begins to shift. It's a bright morning, and the first sensory detail is the sound. This deep, powerful, completely alien rumble of heavy engines echoing through the valley.
The arrival is described with this almost surgical precision by Ko. These enormous trucks, dull green with these big white stars on them. A sight of just overwhelming foreign power.
And the soldiers themselves, they're so tall, their uniforms are clean, their boots hit the ground with these heavy, decisive thuds. They're the terrifying antithesis of the exhausted, ragged Japanese soldier they were used to seeing.
But the most shocking detail, this first subtle crack in the propaganda, is their demeanor.
Right. They aren't storming the village with bloodlust. Some are chewing gum, their jaws just working in this casual, almost offensive rhythm. The source says it was careless in a way that just shocked the rigidly formal Japanese.
And their expressions. Not angry, not cruel, almost bored.
Curious, maybe.
Yeah, curious. Where is the promised fire and brimstone? This casual indifference to their role as conquerors is the first ideological bomb. It suggests that maybe they didn't see the villagers as the demons the Japanese had been told they were.
And then comes the official declaration. An officer, through a Japanese translator, and the message just directly contradicts years of indoctrination.
He lists off the orders of the Allied Occupation Authority. Registration, medical screenings,
Mhm.
and then the absolute game changer.
Food distribution will begin tomorrow, and then do not be afraid, cooperate, and no harm will come to you.
Those words must have just hung in the air. So potent, yet so ridiculous in the face of years of conditioned fear. If they're demons, why are they offering food?
If they're merciless, why promise cooperation will lead to safety? It makes no sense.
And it's Grandmother Hannah who tests this promise. She doesn't rely on hope.
Mm.
She relies on brutal, practical reality. She just walks out leaning on her stick and confronts this foreign power.
And demands, we're hungry. When will this food come?
It's the perfect, unadorned challenge to the occupation. And the response is immediate, simple, and totally devoid of malice.
Tomorrow morning, 8.0, here at the well. The speed, the clarity, the lack of any threat, it's just shocking.
Hannah, processing this, whispers to Ko, "Remember this moment. They haven't shot us yet."
That's the low bar set by the propaganda, and it's the first undeniable, factual victory over fear. The demon offered food instead of a bullet.
So the next morning, hunger, which the source describes as a powerful force stronger than fear, it draws the villagers very reluctantly to the well.
And the source captures this intense sensory experience of that first distribution.
It starts with the smell.
Oh, yeah. The rich, overwhelming scent of real food. They start unloading these wooden crates, and they reveal mountains of canned goods, enormous bags of rice, dried milk powder, chocolate bars, cigarettes.
Things that constituted just unimaginable wealth to people who were used to starvation. Ko hadn't seen that much abundance in years.
And then the specific, personalized act of generosity that really begins to fracture their worldview. When Hannah and her daughter get to the front of the line, a young soldier with freckles, he smiles at Hannah.
And he does something that completely violates the logic of wartime rationing.
He doesn't give her a single ration. He hands her 3 cans of food, a bag of rice, and a bar of chocolate. This excessive generosity is the first genuine shock.
The mother's confused reaction reveals the depth of their confusion.
Yeah.
She just says, why? Why would they give us so much?
In a world that's been defined by this brutal, zero-sum logic of war and scarcity, excessive generosity is just incomprehensible. It forces the doubt to bloom. If they want to destroy us, why are they feeding us so well?
And that confusion just deepens with medical screenings. The immediate sharp fear was driven by rumors of what the enemy did to prisoners.
Experiments, sterilization, torture.
But the reality was orderly, efficient, and most importantly, gentle. We hear about a doctor with gray hair and kind eyes examining Ko. He notices her ribs sticking out, her extreme thinness, all signs of severe malnutrition.
And his diagnosis isn't a punishment, it's care. He prescribes her extra rations and hands her actual wrapped candy, telling her simply, eat.
And Hannah, with her persistent cough, she receives real medicine and vitamins. The nurse translates the doctor's words. She needs care.
That unexpected note of deep clinical sympathy and providing effective medicine, not just a placebo, is a profound violation of that enemy image.
The mother's refrain just summarizes the whole ideological crisis perfectly. I don't understand. Why are they doing this? What do they want from us?
She's searching for the trap, the hidden cost, the sinister motive, because accepting simple, disinterested mercy requires demolishing her entire worldview.
And Hannah's quiet counterpoint, the voice of the stubborn realist, it plants the first seed of systemic truth. Maybe they want nothing. Maybe this is simply what they do.
The events we just discussed, they prepared the ground. But the moment that truly cracked the reality of the propaganda happened about 2 weeks later.
And the source focuses on a mandatory walk. The families have to go 5 miles to a larger registration center.
And Hannah insists on walking. She refuses a ride on one of the few available trucks, maintaining her stoic pride. She wants to save space for others. But the effort required is immense.
The path is long, it's winding, it's thick with dust, and it ends in this deceptively long slope. For a 70-year-old woman who's been weakened by years of near starvation, that hill isn't just a physical challenge. It becomes a psychological mountain.
Every single step is an act of physical defiance against her own frail body.
And the source captures the moment of Hannah's defeat, which is this profound narrative beat, because Ko had never seen her stoic grandmother fail before. Her legs shake, her breathing comes in these harsh, rasping gasps. She stops, leans heavily on her stick, and whispers the words of total surrender. I cannot make it.
Her lifetime of endurance has finally failed her.
And the mother is trapped. They have to register to get more help, but she and Ko are too small and weak to carry Hannah the rest of the way. They're just stuck in this moment of agonizing physical impossibility.
Trapped between necessity and their inability to move.
And that's when the young American soldier appears. He approaches slowly, he sees their struggle. He says something they can't understand, but his body language is crystal clear.
He kneels down, pats his own back, and mimes carrying something.
Okay, we have to pause here. We have to understand the depth of the cultural breach this represents. The mother's reaction is just horror, vigorous refusal. No, no, we cannot.
And this isn't just modesty. For a Japanese civilian, especially a woman, to be physically handled by a male foreigner, a supposed enemy, and to allow a conqueror to touch the family matriarch, Hana, it's absurd. It's unthinkable. It violates the established order of enmity and honor and physical contact.
The soldier, he's probably totally unaware of the exact cultural chasm he's facing. He just remains patient, gentle, his expression clearly just says he wants to help.
And then Hana, the symbol of stoic Japanese survival, of obedience to cultural necessity, she surrenders. She tells her daughter, with just a wave of her hand, "Help me."
So they lift her onto his back. And here's the narrative's moment of profound, undeniable simplicity. The soldier stands up easily, adjusts her weight, and starts walking steadily. The source notes that he carries her as if carrying a Japanese grandmother up a hill was something he did every day.
And you have to picture the scene. Ko and her mother are following, just utterly stunned. They're watching his careful pace, how he navigates the rocky path, the occasional glance back to check on Hana.
And other villagers are just frozen, staring. This public act of physical care by an enemy is a live-action physical impossibility within the propaganda narrative they've been fed.
And that silent trauma gives way to the verbal outburst that defines the whole story. Ko, the child, is the first one who can no longer contain the cognitive dissonance.
"Why are you carrying my mother?"
Yeah.
she asks in Japanese.
He doesn't understand the words, of course, but he hears the question in her voice. That mixture of shock and confusion and this nascent hope, and he just smiles.
He just smiles and keeps walking, carrying her, as the source says, like she was someone precious, someone worth protecting.
That simple human smile, coupled with the immense, undeniable physical act of dignity. That's the ideological bomb that shatters the propaganda.
At the top of the hill, Hana bows deeply, tears just streaming down her face. And she articulates the unbelievable truth that must have felt like a blasphemy.
He was kind. The enemy was kind to me. Saying those words aloud must have cost her something. It meant accepting that everything they had been told and everything they had sacrificed for might have been based on lies.
The cost of accepting that kindness is the price of ideological destruction.
So after that, the presence of the American starts to normalize, and this methodical, steady kindness continues. The occupation wasn't just about, handing out rations and then leaving. It was about rebuilding civil society in a way that directly benefited the people.
Right. They set up permanent barracks, they distributed supplies with what the source calls methodical fairness, and they began actual reconstruction.
And this systemic, consistent fairness is so vital. It proves that the kindness on the Hill wasn't a one-off act of individual charity. It was institutional policy. They repaired roads that had been damaged by bombs. They put a new roof on the school. They cleaned the village well. It demonstrated a real commitment to the long-term well-being of this conquered territory.
And crucially, the soldiers worked alongside Japanese laborers. They paid them fairly in food, cigarettes, sometimes actual yen, and treated them as partners in the labor, not as conquered subjects or slaves.
And that small detail, it chips away at the demon narrative every single day.
The accumulation of all these small details becomes impossible to ignore. The soldier who smiled at the children, the medic who made house calls for minor illnesses, the strange, lively jazz music drifting from the camp at night.
The source even recounts children daringly dancing near the camp, and the soldiers encouraging them, treating them like children who deserve to laugh, not future enemies.
And grandmother Hana, she voices the profound internal shift that's starting to take place in the collective consciousness. He says, they are different than we were told, or perhaps we were lied to about what makes someone a demon.
She recognizes that the definition of demon was purely a political tool, not a humanitarian description.
But with this growing comfort, with the normalization of the American presence, comes a devastating side effect: guilt.
Yeah. Because while they are safe in receiving food, letters finally start arriving from relatives in the firebombed cities Tokyo, Osaka, and of course the atomic wastelands of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And this is the moment of moral agony. Ko's mother is reading these accounts of her starving cousins who are eating grass and rats, of children dying in the streets, of families resorting to truly desperate measures just for survival.
And the crushing randomness of their own survival hits hard. The family is reading these devastating letters, and at the same time, they can hear American laughter and smell their dinner cooking nearby real meat, canned beans, actual food that hadn't been seen in most of Japan for years.
The mother whispers the terrible question that haunts every survivor. Why us? Why are we being fed while they starve? The kindness creates this new moral burden, a sense of betrayal to their suffering countrymen who went through the true horror of the war's final days and are now paying the deepest cost of defeat.
The intellectual groundwork for processing this paradox, it actually began with a voluntary English class. It was taught by Lieutenant James, who, significantly, had studied Japanese history before the war.
And Cove, who's motivated by curiosity and this profound need to understand the people who saved her grandmother, she joins the class. Her goal is simple: to move beyond basic gratitude and understand the mindset of these soldiers.
And the class offered the intellectual framework that transformed random charity into principled action. Lieutenant James explained the Geneva Conventions, the rules about how to treat prisoners and, by extension, civilians.
Which demonstrates that the American actions weren't random sentimental kindness. They were rooted in moral and legal principles, a conscious choice of institutional restraint, even in total victory.
And this is such a powerful distinction for the Japanese villagers. It suggests their enemy operates under a code of conduct that might be superior to the one they themselves had followed. It implies that decency is a systematic choice, not just a personal one.
And the human element comes back. When the soldier from the hill, he sees Ko in the class one day, and he shows her this creased photograph of his own grandmother. He identifies her as Grandma, Nana, Grammy.
That photo, it provided a personal anchor. He was human, he missed his family, he was far from home. It's such an ordinary, universal fact, but it completely undermines a decade of dehumanizing propaganda. He wasn't a demon, he was just a boy carrying someone else's grandmother up a hill because he knew what a grandmother was.
And this emotional and intellectual dismantling, it all leads to the pivotal question Ko asks Hana while they're weeding the garden one day away from the watchful eyes of others.
If they lied about the Americans, what else did they lie about?
This is the core moment of ideological unraveling for the nation, just condensed into a single conversation between a girl and her grandmother.
And Hana's response is just definitive. Heartbreaking, yet liberating. Everything, child. They lied about everything. And she articulates the reason for the deception with this chilling clarity, to make us fight, to make us hate, to make us willing to die for them. Fear and hatred were the necessary tools to prevent surrender, to ensure ultimate sacrifice for a collapsing regime.
And this realization, it ignites a painful public reckoning in the village, a microcosm of the national struggle taking place all across Japan. Arguments spiral. Someone yells, "They bombed our cities," which is then met with the difficult counter-truth: "We attacked Pearl Harbor, and we committed atrocities across Asia."
The source notes the quiet bravery of a former teacher who stands up and says, "We were told that death was preferable to surrender, yet here we are, alive, being fed by the very enemy we were taught to hate unto death." The sheer hypocrisy of the former government's directive, contrasted with the current reality of being nourished by the conqueror, it was just too heavy to deny.
But not everyone could accept it. Ko's mother struggled the most. She couldn't accept that her husband and son died for nothing, based on lies.
Her grief was intrinsically tied to the propaganda. If the enemy wasn't a demon, then the sacrifice of her son had been senseless, maybe even wrong. She needed the lies to justify the horror she had endured.
The ideological turning point for her, the final, undeniable proof that the Japanese government had fundamentally betrayed its people, arrived in November. Red Cross mail, which had been delayed and rerouted across the globe, finally makes it to the village.
And in it is a letter from Ko's father, captured in 1944.
He's alive, in an American POW camp in California. And his testimony, written from the belly of the beast they were told was hell on earth, is the ultimate psychological blow to the wartime ideology.
He writes, "They feed us well. I am healthier now than I was as a fighting soldier. I wanted to hate them, but they wouldn't let me."
They wouldn't let me.
That last sentence, that's the definitive summary of mercy as a weapon.
And the mother's reaction is just this complex mask of relief, confusion, and profound betrayal. Her husband, who fought for the purity of the divine nation, was not only alive, but he was healthier because the enemy chose to follow rules and display basic human decency.
The enemy had saved her family, and in doing so had proven that her own government had lied about everything that mattered.
So this brings us to the profound synthesis of the entire narrative. What we promised to distill for you, the listener. The truth is out, the lies are revealed, And now they have to define what this mercy actually means for their future.
And Hannah provides that initial, powerful perspective. It's rooted in the emotional cost of being proven wrong. She says, the cruelest thing they've done is show us mercy.
That's a powerful line.
It is. She says, if they had been the demons we were promised, we could have kept our hatred pure, kept our moral high ground. She recognizes that kindness annihilated their ability to maintain their moral righteousness and their ideological purity.
But Ko, the next generation, she offers this corrective insight. It's born of the trauma, but also of the slow lessons learned on that hill. No, she says, that's not the cruelest thing. The cruelest thing would have been if they had lived down to our expectations.
And that right there is the central thesis distilled by the source material. By consistently showing mercy, the Americans broke the cycle of hatred and vengeance. Kindness, as Ko realizes, is a weapon, but not the kind that destroys, the kind that rebuilds.
It forces you to question your own inhumanity and to acknowledge the humanity of your enemy, which is the necessary first step toward any kind of real peace.
This is the concept of ideological defeat in action. You know, the Japanese were defeated militarily when the bombs fell, but the long-term victory was secured by demonstrating a better, more humane way of conducting international relations and organizing a society, even in the aftermath of total war and devastation.
And we see the physical, undeniable proof of this ideological victory when Ko's father returns in the spring of 1946. He's flown back on a military transport plane, and he is a jarring sight. He's healthy, well-fed, rested, a stark contrast to the still thin villagers.
His final realization mirrors the village's collective journey. He talks about trying to maintain his hatred, but finding it impossible to sustain when he was faced with simple, structured humanity. He looks at his family and asks the key question that the entire occupation hinged on. How can you win a war and then choose mercy?
And Hannah, the pragmatic matriarch who lived through the entire ordeal, gives the final defining lesson that explains the geopolitical power of their choices.
You win a war, she says, by defeating the enemy. You win the peace by showing them a better way.
They defeated us militarily, now they're defeating us ideologically by being what we were told they could never be, humane.
Which has these profound implications for how peace is built, right? When one side is totally victorious, the temptation is to enforce total humiliation and extraction, of course. But the U.S. occupation, especially in those early days of food, medicine, and genuine structural aid, it established an allegiance that was rooted in gratitude, not coercion. It prevented the seeds of a future insurgency from ever taking root.
And that choice, to invest in the enemy's survival and dignity, it ultimately saved the U.S. untold administrative costs and created one of its most powerful and enduring geopolitical alliances of the 20th and 21st centuries.
The price of the food and medical supplies was far, far less than the price of a perpetual military occupation that would have been needed to suppress a vengeful populace.
And Ko carries this wisdom forward. She grows up and becomes a history teacher, always sharing the story of the Hill with her students. She confronts the painful complexity of the historical record head-on, especially when students raise the unavoidable, difficult question of the atomic bomb.
And she refuses to simplify the past. She affirms that the atomic bombs were terrible things, that war brings out the absolute worst and the absolute best in humanity. But she insists on maintaining the simultaneous truths.
The soldier who carried my grandmother, she would say, didn't drop those bombs. Both realities, the terrible destructive power of the occupation and the persistent redemptive humanity within it, they have to be held at the same time.
And this final teaching from Hannah, given on her deathbed at 94, it solidifies the lesson for future generations and for us, the listeners, today. Remember that the enemy was kind to me. Remember that we were wrong about them. And remember that propaganda always lies.
The story even became an internal narrative for the American troops. At Hannah's funeral, years later, some occupation veterans attend. And one confirms that while he wasn't the soldier on the hill, everyone did hear about it. It became this internal story among the troops about building a bridge, about proving themselves to be restorers, not just conquerors.
Ko's conclusion is that the bridge of peace was built, and that people like the soldier and Hannah were the foundation stones. The ultimate lesson is that the most dangerous weapon in any conflict is the lie that makes us see others as less than human. The strongest defense and the only long-term path to peace. Treating people with dignity, especially when they're supposed to be your enemy.
That journey, from the profound, life-threatening fear of the demon to the quiet, life-affirming gratitude toward the humane occupier. It's one of the most powerful narratives in post-war history. It's a testament to the fact that propaganda's power is absolute. only until a single, undeniable truth like a soldier carrying an old woman up a dusty hill breaks the entire narrative.
And it forces us to really deeply consider the immense moral courage required. Not just for Ko and Hana to receive that mercy and admit their ideological wrongness, but for that soldier to offer it when his side had every military, political, and historical right to inflict vengeance. It wasn't just a soft strategy. It was a moral choice, consciously made at an institutional level.
So, as you reflect on this history, consider this central idea. The source explicitly states that the Americans were trying to build something better after all the destruction.
So how does the deliberate choice of mercy in a moment of total, unchallengeable power like the U.S. occupation, where they held all the cards, serve as the ultimate long-term geopolitical strategy? How does it effectively dissolve historical enmity and create an enduring alliance? It suggests that kindness offered consistently and systemically may be the only force truly capable of long-term ideological defeat. It can transform enemies into allies far more effectively than prolonged retribution ever could. Something to mull over as you observe global conflicts today.